Hello, everybody out there in radio land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. As always, it's a weekly news and talk program where we talk about what's going on here in the city of Kalamazoo, the state of Michigan, so-called United States, and the goings-ons around the world from a working class perspective, basically calling out the establishment on its BS. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may be. Joined right now by my co-host Nora. Nora, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing okay, doing okay.
Great, fantastic. So, I think we're going to start. So, there's the big story, and we will be getting to that. Again, big Michigan, big national and international labor story. We're going to be talking about UAW in a little bit. We've also got some critical stories talking about trans rights. And I think we're going to open today's program some a little bit different. Again, the name of the game, the name of the show is Media Ciphers. We often critique mainstream media. Sometimes, though, it's worth taking our critical lens and looking at some of the more progressive or explicitly socialist sources that we like to print from and do engage in a little bit of critique of them, as well as some of the politicians out there across the country and in the state of Michigan. It's another story we're going to be talking about. Um, but I got to open by saying that we've got a couple of stories that I think highlight some particular issues with outlets that we've actually kind of gone to the well of on our program before, as well as kind of progressive talking heads who are kind of once again showing their more toxic opinions, attributes, etc. Um, See, Nora, did you want to start on that? There's a couple of things I wanted to kind of bring to the fore before. There's a particular take from World Socialist website I wanted to talk about, but I know you've got a couple of things kind of tying into some when progressive media makes missteps.
Yeah, I think the World Socialist website story is actually a great one to start off with. So for context, some of you may have already heard that there have been very credible accusations of grooming and sexual assault to the actor, comp slash comedian Russell Brand, who used to be like a big also like a notable like Hollywood leftist, but then like started to like make a big conservative grift for it lately. It's been well documented. If you want like some information on how that whole downfall went about, you can watch the Cavernacle on YouTube. But it also points out like some significant things with that because like Russell Brand is from the UK, right? And like if you are accused of SA and there's no like real evidence, then like the UK or accused of anything really, the UK has really robust libel laws like that are kind of dangerous to freedom of speech, but that's a whole other discussion. But like, if you like smear someone in any way that's not like very substantiated, then that's something you could easily sue for libel for it. The notorious J.K. Rowling does that, sues people for libel all the time, for example. However, like Russell Brand made no such libel suit against these accusations because there's robust evidence for this. Like there's texts, there's screenshots, there's like a lot more evidence than you would usually see in these sort of like Hollywood sexual assault stories. Like he definitely did it. Like let's not let's not mince words about it. That's absolutely
Yeah,
what happened. The fact
the
that we're
the,
not seeing a
the
UK libel suit
receipts.
come out of this tells you all you need to know in
Yeah, the
this regard.
receipts are plentiful, as well as corroboration with people in his closest inner circle. So, yeah, as you mentioned, this isn't even a kind of he said, she said situation. It was, again, piles upon piles of receipts. Um, and you may, so folks out there might wonder, it's like, okay, this Hollywood story, this sort of like Me Too moment, what does this have to do with the World Socialist website? And so we've shared their reporting on our program before. We actually did an interview with one of the reporters a couple years ago, kind of done off not, and they typically they do pretty good work when it comes to really a critical eye on labor, and even being like, sometimes I even criticize them being a little too on the side of criticism. But they do a lot of really emphasizing rank and file workers over union bureaucracy, which is a good thing. And but when the World Socialist website engages in cultural issues, a funny thing happens. They lurch rightward and kind of wrap it in a lot of these left wing and socialist terminologies. And this isn't the first time that this has happened, but it's probably just so flagrantly egregious when it comes to this Russian brand story because, as Norris mentioned, there's mountains of evidence corroborating these allegations. So what was the World Socialist website's take on this? I'm gonna read the headline and just start with there. This is the headline and I remind you, this is a socialist website. They call themselves socialist. The headline was "Comic Actor Russell Brand Lynched by Media Mob After Sexual Assault Allegations." And you know, first of all, they've also referred to these types of situations as witch hunts. And it, what I observe is like when the World Socialist website reports on these issues, and there's a whole other thing about like why they're reporting on these issues to begin with that I'll also touch on. But it's like they go from Leon Trotsky to Ben Shapiro at the speed of light. It's a really kind of amazing and sort of gross thing to watch, where this website that on the one hand has these journalists out there interviewing rank and file workers across Michigan, across the country, doing really good work that the mainstream media does not do. They also put out these op-eds that they read like they're written by right-wing dinosaurs who maybe they were Trotskyists at one point. They're like, I kind of made a joke like it seems like there might be people on the editorial board who are like these kind of white-haired professors who are in fear of having their own Me Too movement. So whenever something like this comes up, whether it's Russell
I think
Brand,
Noam Chomsky is a good example of that. Just for the record.
yeah, yeah. But they've basically had this very similar script whether you're talking about Russell Brand or Johnny Depp or Kevin Spacey. Um, and so the rest of the article kind of dives into this concept that we've critiqued some people in kind of progressive media circles of which is trying to equivocate, maybe having an opinion contrary to the establishment as like having leftist or anti-establishment bona fide. So they refer in this article to his stance on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, which again is completely divorced from the actual substance of what Russell Brand is being accused of. And it's reminiscent of the way that we talked on the show about how like certain people like Jimmy Dore consider Tucker Carlson to be legitimately anti-imperialist or anti-war. When you actually look at their politics, that's ridiculous. And as you mentioned, Russell Brand himself has kind of been drifting more towards this kind of like the conspiratorial right sort of stuff, but he wraps it in a lot of like kind of new agey terminology and such. Um, so so what? There's something innately peculiar about a socialist website that goes out of its way to defend and prop up these petty bourgeois men who have been accused of being sexual predators. It's a little head scratching. You certainly don't see that in any other left wing website. Probably the closest analog, another great website we draw content from and reporting from Left Voice, which is also kind of a Trotskyist socialist news website. You don't see them go out of their way to report on this and kind of just cry about due process, due process, due process. Um, and again, there's a couple of kind of holes you can poke in that, which is to say, the American legal system, or the UK legal system in this case, are not necessarily shining beacons of jurisprudence.
Hmm.
And particularly, and the facts have been laid out by this on this is particularly victims of that sort of sexual assault often do not go forward, and it has a case failure rates are much higher than most other serious crimes. And particularly, just to put the nail on the head, if you are a working class person who has been predated on by somebody famous and rich and powerful, it doesn't take a Marxist scholar to understand there might be some trepidation about coming forward with those allegations. Uh, and what the World Socialist website really does a big disservice by you're juxtaposing these critiques of capitalism and bourgeois elements of labor movement with these god awful takes that really they sound like they could have come from a Ben Shapiro or Andrew Tate video. What motivates them to
I
publish articles like this is not known, but it is head scratching to say the least. I'm sorry, go ahead, Nora.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's like particularly interesting about this case, like I totally agree with you. Why would a socialist website be interested in defending a wealthy celebrity who's not even socialist anymore? Like that's so bizarre to me. And you do a really good point, like with bringing up Jimmy Dore, but I think there's something to be said about people who like suddenly make a rightward pivot to like what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if anyone remembers when like the sexual assault allegations for Elon Musk came out, right? Around the same time, he decided to make a rightward pivot because he knew that people on that side politically would have been more willing to forgive him for that. And like, of course, the right is always hungry for celebrities that like will support them, even though their ideas are, like pretty heinous and hard to support publicly. So what I'm like that this is like a pattern. I feel like I'm not saying like Jimmy Dore did like I guess essay anybody at least that I'm aware of, but like it just kind of makes you wonder, like there the pattern like of this is like noticeable, and you don't see a lot of people making that like a through line to Russell Brand and Elon Musk making that flip. Although obviously Elon Musk was never a socialist, even if he confusingly claimed to be one a couple years back, but that's a whole other story. Um, so, but yeah, people like the post Me Too movement, people will like do a lot of things in order to like get out of the accountability of their actions. And it's not to say that like liberals are super keen on like keeping track of these allegations as well, because Joe Biden wouldn't have won the primary if that was the case. You know what I'm saying? Remember Tara Reid? I
Mhm.
know that she wasn't the only one, but she's the first that comes to mind on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't know if it's I will say it definitely does seem to be a straight, this isn't just an outlier. Because like I said, I've seen a pattern of this type of coverage when it comes to particularly covering high-profile sexual assault cases. A couple of years ago, actually, there was a speaker on campus, Joseph Kishore, and he was making a lot of the same claims in his speech. It was a very weird pivot because I think it was a lecture about the history of the Russian Revolution, and all of a sudden he starts talking about the witch hunt of the Me Too movement that's been astroturfed by the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I
And
noticed that in some of WSW's reporting as well, and which I do think is like kind of a crazy conspiracy. However, the fact that the Tara Reid allegations got pushed under the rug as hard as it did, like that's the only credibility I can see to that personally. Like, so I get where they're coming from in that regard specifically, but it's still really gross to go on that kind of tangent in the first place.
yeah, also there's a lot of historical cherry picking with that because I got
Exactly.
I disrupted a little bit and pointed out that the Me Too movement itself was started by Tara Burke, who was, a leftist African American organizer trying to highlight the fact that the legal system does not prosecute or provide protections for people against the sort of the sexual assaults, and particularly scenarios involving a differentiation in, like who's in power. And it again feels a lot like, again, it's this very right wing thing where they are mistaking social consequences and legal consequences. This idea that somebody becoming a social pariah because of accusations is tantamount to, and they use these terms, witch hunt or lynch,
Ugh.
which any leftist you should know. You don't use those terms to describe those scenarios because, again, lynching refers to the systemic murder of African Americans in the 17th, 19th, and 20th centuries, a little bit today, and witch hunts were basically a tool of patriarchal power domination even earlier in our history to prosecute mostly women who did not fit inside the box of the social and cultural norms at the time. To see that flipped around to defend people who, again, are the very same kind of petty bourgeois strata that socialists are supposed to either oppose or convert to socialism is, again, really strange and odd and a little ridiculous, and it makes me wonder who is making the editorial decisions at places like the World Socialist website that you are going to devote ink and page space to these takes defending people that certainly don't need the World Socialist website to come to their defense, and certainly don't need the World Socialist website to use all these leftist and socialist terms to develop this pretzel logic to try to make a quote unquote socialist case for defending people like Russell Brand from getting canceled or whatnot. So again, this has been a consistent issue that, and I know a lot of our readers, you might not be familiar with the World Socialist website, but there's not a lot of progressive outlets out there, and I think it's important, as you look for media alternatives, um, it's important for our listeners to understand who stands where on what. And I wouldn't want, one of our younger listeners to stumble on that website and see a headline line like this and be like, is that what socialism is about? I'm here to tell you, no, absolutely not. That is not what socialism is about. And yeah, I can only guess why the World Socialist website would be publishing stuff like this, but I think I can only guess that maybe somebody on their editorial board has some picadillos about men being exposed for their wrongdoings. But I don't know if I don't want to drift into potential libelous um, uh, um, hypothesizing. So I will just leave it there. But
Yeah, we're
for,
not saying like trying to suggest that anyone is guilty of something that we don't have evidence of, but sometimes things are at least a little suspicious, you know?
yeah, yeah, and again, there is a way to talk about these issues that do not uplift very rich bourgeois, petite bourgeois predators. Um, and it's again very strange the way the World Socialist website approaches issues like this, and it again is sometimes I describe them that they're almost like the right of the left wing media because again they talk a lot, about a lot of their points on labor and imperialism are on point, but when it comes to cultural issues, they will come up with takes like this. You notice there's been a kind of suspicious lack of coverage on the assault on trans rights that again, for another comparison, Left Voice, another Trotskyist socialist news outlet, has been very much on top of. Um, and
Yeah,
instead,
it took the World Socialist Month website months to report on trans issues in the U.S. I mean, they had a good take on it, but like, why did it take so long?
precisely. So I'll just say, like, in the future, they do some good coverage, but with the caveat that they've got some, I would say, some straight up cultural revisionists in their midst of that website. So be careful going to that website for their cultural takes. And again, there are a lot of great outlets that also do wonderful work. Left Voice highlight once again. Um, and then I know, Nora, you also brought up some other stories kind of in that vein. If you want to kind of slightly pivot to that.
Yeah, it's good that you bring up the topic of like leftists making the like whole anti-woke left pivot because in a similar vein who I don't know if anybody else listening remembers Jimmy Dore, but he's a former contributor on TYT, and he split off to do his own show because he had like some different coverage on things. Fair enough, but like then he started to like make a lot of like significant pivots on social issues. I think the most significant one was having a member of the Proud Boys on his show. I think that was kind of just the beginning of the end for it. And by that point, I already unsubscribed. But
Quick correction, was that it was the Boogaloo Boys, I thought. Was that
it was one of them. I don't know.
yeah.
They're like the same to me, but you get what I'm saying. Like,
So just a quick aside, there's some irony baked into this. So World Socialist website is also pretty decent about reporting on state of fascism. So on that same episode, Jimmy Dore was hosting a reporter from the World Socialist website who pointed out to Jimmy, hey, you should not be platforming the Boogaloo Boys. And Jimmy Dore got very defensive and actually angry
hmm.
that somebody was trying to educate him about this fascist group. But yeah, go on, Nora. Sorry.
Right, exactly. But like one thing that's been at least consistent about Jimmy's coverage for a while now is his strong belief in voting third party against the Democrats. He's very heavily critical of the Democrats, and rightfully so for the most part. Now, I'm primarily of the belief that you should be encouraged to vote third party in a deep blue state, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, he actually did get Green Party candidate Cornel West on an interview, but it was really bizarre. Like if you go over the video, it's very disproportionately Jimmy talking over Cornell, despite the fact that they got such a high-profile interview in the first place, and primarily telling Cornel West, who is like a lifelong racial justice activist, by the way, to not focus on racial issues for his campaign and like do this sort of like class reductionist thing, which is very bizarre. It was it was really bad. I mean, I'll admit I didn't watch the full video so much as someone going over it. Shark 300 on YouTube and Twitch has a very good breakdown of that same video if you're interested. And it's not. I wouldn't say it's surprising, but it is it is kind of wild the fact that like how are you gonna like go this hard for the Green Party and then like talk over the one that you're supposed to support this whole time? Like it's another just real bizarre thing to me, and just also kind of really disappointing. Um, I think it's worth bringing up though. But that's all I really have to say on the topic. Do you have anything that you wanted to add before we go into like some reproductive rights update?
Well, I will say just on the Jimmy Dore thing, I think like okay, just one. This is a little like nerdy inside baseball, but even before Jimmy started his weird kind of cultural right anti woke pivot, he was probably the worst leftist interviewer on YouTube for exactly the reason you mentioned, which is that any Jimmy Dore interview was about like 70% him talking at the camera and maybe 30% of him letting his guest talk. Which again, that's not really how you're supposed to conduct a show. But also, yeah, just the kind of the ridiculous nature of I'm excited about what could happen with Cornel West. Like I've got my own concerns and critiques about I've so full disclosure, I'm the chair of the Socialist Party of Michigan. Um, but I am a little bit cynical about um what third parties can actually accomplish by running at the national level. I think Cornel West does afford some unique opportunities, especially as how high profile he is. I am concerned that they could Naderize him, which is to say, Ralph Nader for the longest time was most famous for being a robust consumer safety advocate. He still is. But among the liberal class, he's mostly known as the guy who handed the election to George W. Bush, which again is ahistorical and just bad analysis. But I don't know. I'm concerned we could, something like that could happen to Cornel West, which again, I'm not normally concerned about what centrists are really thinking, but they do control the narrative a lot. And Yeah, I mean, I am a little concerned if like what is to be gained from Cornel West running versus what could be lost. But particularly just how boneheaded that sort of take of Jimmy Dore is, like being able to tie together labor and working class issues and racial justice. That is the key to speaking to the emerging working class. And I think Jimmy's coming from this idea that we need to put this mythological, like white male factory worker, working class person on a pedestal. And it's kind of funny. We're about to talk about the UAW, which kind of fits with that. But again, like it views labor and working class issues from this very narrow prism that every working class town with white people are all just a bunch of like socially reactionary Fox News viewers. And as we're seeing, that is far from the case. And even in cases where we do have kind of this sort of white majority among the workforce, we're seeing uh, not only a uniting of kind of these racial and cultural barriers, but we're seeing them tie that together with a deeper history of how race and class have interacted in the needs of the working class in a way that I think it's worth being really hopeful about because I don't think we've really had an example in American history where those things are inexplicably intertwined, except among factions of labor like Knights of Labor, IWW, Communist Party, etc. But for people like Jimmy Dore, who still has a pretty sizable platform to kind of miss the forest through the trees, it does harm, particularly among people who still kind of follow that progressive left uh, take. And I think it hurts any white leftists who are taking the advice of people like Jimmy Dore are missing on the fact that the sectors of the working class that are mobilizing quick are service workers, people in warehouses, Amazon, Bessemer, Chris Smalls is one of the most exciting labor organizers I've seen in years. And he dresses like somebody down the block, the proletariat. Um, so yeah, kind of trying to say we shouldn't talk about racial justice issues, particularly to the working class, the American working class of 2024. I think Jimmy just doesn't know what year it is. That's my best guess conclusion.
Yeah, and you really bring up a good point about that being an ahistorical analysis because the cross-racial working class movements of the past in the U.S. have been very successful. I'm trying to remember a specific one, but I know that there was one in North Carolina. Do you know what that was called again? But it was I know that one was a big deal, like way back in the day.
Like
And to
Harlan, is that the Harlan County labor struggle? I'm
something
will
like that.
correct things as
I
it.
don't remember.
Yeah,
Anyways, but the point is, like, it works a lot better that way, and to like to to frame it otherwise is really ahistorical. Like the working class has always been like multiracial. It's like usually been disproportionately female. Um, a lot of like LGBT people, like like are very much overrepresented in the lower and middle classes as well. We could go on with this, but you can't really like an anti-woke leftist is not a real leftist, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah, exactly, and that's good advice for both or I guess, a good word of caution for the Jimmy Dores and the world socialist websites of the world. Um, yeah. So with that, let's pivot a little bit towards the political class and people among them who've been disappointed. Now, again, kind of pivoting away from people who call themselves progressive, but I think there's good examples of as Lenin once said, don't trust the liberals; they will betray you. And we've got two stories about that. Did you want to start with the one from California, Nora?
I was actually hoping you could start with the one from Michigan.
Oh, okay. So, um, I wanted to refer to this. I'm sourcing this from a Bridge, Michigan article, and just to give some highlights. So there's a representative in the Michigan, um, excuse me, um, Michigan House, represents a part of Detroit. And Michigan, as most of you know, in the last election, Michigan historical majority of Democrats hasn't happened in decades. So they've been trying to figure out, what opportunities do they have to pass some of this legislation that's been on their bucket list for a while. And Karen Whitsett from the Detroit area is kind of playing this Joe Manchin role when it comes to this sweeping abortion rights reform. But she is kind of standing up, voting against the Reproductive Health Act, which it's an 11 bill package of abortion access bills that they're trying to pass in the wake of this majority. Um, and a couple of things she points out. Sorry. She is against several of the state funding that would go into it. It's kind of trying to stake out an in-between position where it's like, oh, well, I voted on Proposal 4, but I basically saying she's uncomfortable with like direct government support towards abortion access. It almost reminds me of who's that Republican from Maine who always um,
Susan Collins?
yes, yeah. It almost reminds me more of a Susan Collins type answer than something I would even hear from kind of a more a liberal Democrat. So, anyways, it's kind of throwing a monkey wrench into these proposed abortion rights access reforms. And she is getting pressured by, Planned Parenthood of Michigan here. She is claiming that there are other people in the Michigan House who agree with her, although there's some debate about that in the article. Lori Pahutsky, a Democrat from Livonia, disputes that, says that, in quotes, does not reflect the conversations I've been having, which is polite political speak for, I think you're blowing smoke. Um, so a couple of other things to kind of refer to with Wistek, because I think it's important to point out is that this is somebody who it almost reminds me of doing some of this Tulsi Gabbard stuff because she thanked the president for recommending hydroxychloroquine in the early part of the pandemic. So to get kind of these fringe beliefs that play into some of her politics, and has been known to go on these like right-wing talk shows.
Just real quick, I'm pretty sure it wasn't Trump that recommended hydroxychloroquine, but Trump did recommend bleach at one point,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which is
Sorry.
even worse.
Okay, so she ended up she publicly credited, I should say so. Um,
Are you referring to
she
ivermectin, the
No,
horse
no, no,
dewormer?
no.
Okay, never mind.
So yeah, Witt said she publicly credited then President Trump for saving her life by recommending hydroxychloroquine. So at one point, Trump was saying it could be a treatment on his Twitter handle, and she credits that with her recovery. I would say that's probably more the placebo effect. But so she went on to like go on these right wing talk shows and kind of be It's kind of a fly in the ointment. Something like if you mix together a little bit of Joe Manchin, Susan Collins, and what's her name from Arizona? That's
Kirsten Sinema,
here's the cinema, yeah.
which is wild
Um,
because she specifically used to be a Green Party activist.
oh yeah, yeah. Now where this all becomes really interesting is, the article kind of glosses over this, but in the most recent 2020 elections, um, so there was a progressive challenger that was actually endorsed by Bernie Sanders, Rashida Tlaib, but the mayor of Detroit at the time, Mike Duggan, well, I think he's still mayor, endorsed Whitsett. She ended up winning that primary race by 14 points. And what's interesting to me is, I think like abortion rights, it's one of the few things that unites both classical liberals and traditional leftists, um, because we all agree, abortion should be a human right. Access to abortion should be, but um, what you see in this case is when you had the Democratic establishment of Southeast Michigan, uh, backing Whitsett, and the progressives backing their primary challenger. You have a situation where now this point that liberals and leftists can agree on is something that their candidate, their person who's currently in the House, does not, and they are throwing a monkey wrench into a unique time frame where Michigan has the potential to pass these sweeping reforms, and might not be able to do it because for X, Y, and Z reasons, the people in that district voted for Whitsett instead of the progressive challenger. And I think for a lot of the liberal establishment who really does hold, I think it's particularly some of the more kind of feminist centered liberal establishments. Well, not real feminism, but like okay, that we're not going to talk about girl boss feminism and stuff. That's a whole hour-long conversation. But it is to say, by kind of following where the establishment wanted voters to go, we are now at this roadblock. Whereas, if the progressive challenger had been unlifted, we probably would have already passed these reforms by now.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're absolutely right about this, and I think it like does also stand in contrast to what's been going on in Minnesota. In which case, they've been passing like one progressive bill after the next. It's really amazing to see what the kind of work they're doing in there, but they're not, for the most part, they're not getting these kind of similar roadblocks. I think the major exception is workers' rights bill for like Uber and Lyft drivers that wasn't able to go through. However, it's still really significant how little progress is being accomplished in Michigan compared to there when all that's needed is the political will. Now, if this same state house representative is like going on to like right wing grifter videos, then you know exactly like where she stands on the issue, and there's no mincing it. Like we shouldn't have to have our whole system held up by this. And like again, who knows how long this is going to last, right? Like there's still a lot of ways they could support like not only reproductive rights but trans rights in Michigan that they're just not doing. It's not that they don't have they wouldn't have the hypothetical votes. It's just the political will's not there, and they need to be bullied into it by activists,
yeah,
or
and
perhaps even threatened with either a more credible primary challenger, like I guess a more likely victory, I should say. Which like progressives are their positions are popular, but like I guess what more I would more say in that regard is that they would need, I guess, more funding, maybe even someone more charismatic. Possibly, there's a lot of reasons why people could win or lose elections, but that's definitely going to have to be the way to go in order to get these reproductive rights that are necessary, especially at a time when the GOP is quietly organizing to eventually ban birth control.
yeah, and I did want to bring up one other thing. Um, So we've talked about this on the show before, but the kind of the class dimension of the abortion rights struggle and the way that Witset's stance here kind of feeds into that, which is to say, abortion rights is not the same thing as abortion access. Um, so in the state of Michigan, everybody has a right to abortion, but depending on their economic circumstances, they might not have the same access, and whether that includes coverage, transportation to clinics, etc. You know, working class people have like a much longer laundry list of things to think about um, uh, in order to get this procedure than somebody who's more economically well off. So
especially if they have
when
to go out of state.
yeah, so when you have a stance like Witset, who's effectively saying, I believe in the right to the abortion, but I don't want state funding to go towards helping with access, you're basically stratifying abortion access across class lines. And what that means in practice is, a middle class person from Royal Oak might be able to go get an abortion without a problem, but somebody from Detroit, her own district, which has a pretty high poverty rate, might have a much more difficult time scraping the money and the necessary resources to get that same abortion. And again, the irony is present there that again, this decision making is effectively making it more difficult proportionally for people in their own district to have access to abortion than people in the outlying suburbs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it does always perplex me at least a little, the fact that like incumbents in Detroit always get so easily reelected despite all the systemic problems that Detroit has, which is no shade on the city, but like it's just kind of bizarre to me. I understand that there's a lot of money behind it, especially with the gentrification that's happening related to things like water shutoffs, for example. But it's just upsetting to see. And I really hope that they're able to topple the political establishment here, like we were able to do in Chicago recently.
Mhm. And I think it's another abject lesson in, elections have consequences. And, if we don't pay attention, to these Democratic primaries, we might end up with somebody who is putting up a big roadblock. And again, this very popular issue that basically everybody left of the Republican Party can mostly agree on. So again, if you want to find out more details about that, there's an article from Bridge, Michigan, talking about it. We'll link to that in the show notes. Um, so with that, there's a story from basically the other side of the country that is kind of a similar through line, and I thought it was interesting because this comes from the state that is supposedly the most progressive state in the country. This kind of took me aback a little bit. Nora, could you kind of tee off our next story here?
Yeah, so in the state of California, the governor Gavin Newsom, who by the way has not so subtle future presidential ambitions, recently has of course been signing off on every I guess bill promoting trans rights so far.
Yeah.
However, there's been a significant one that he vetoed recently, and this would have been Bill AB 957 that passed with overwhelming support in the state legislature that was designed to protect trans and non-binary children by classifying the lack of life-saving parental affirmation of a child's gender as one of the multiple factors of grounds to lose custody of a child. Say, for example, in a divorce custody battle, one parent supports the kid's right to be themselves and the other doesn't. But this bill would have allowed that to be considered. However, and it's not like it's not happening. That's a point in a lot of I guess Republican talking heads are talking about oh, they're gonna make this a thing where they're gonna take away your kids because you're transphobic to them. Never mind that they're allowing the opposite on their end. In Florida, that's specifically allowed, but that's a whole other discussion. Yeah, Florida legalized kidnapping trans kids, by the way.
Mhm.
Anyways,
That's
and this
the
is
old
also
fascist tactic, accuse the other side of that of which you are guilty. But yeah,
right,
go ahead.
right. But the point is, it's not a hypothetical. Last week, anti-LGBT extremists rallied outside of a Pasadena courthouse in LA County to support a transphobic father trying to take custody of a trans child from a gender-affirming mother. Like, this is something that actually is happening in California currently. So the fact that like Gavin Newsom vetoed this bill is like a real slap in the face to a lot of like, like I guess some specific trans kids, which like, admittedly is not a lot, but like they're already some of the most marginalized people in the country. And it's really gross that he would do this. And the thing with both him and this representative in Detroit we were talking earlier, it's like, what is this triangulation even for? Like, he's already been on record signing like other queer rights bills. Why is he caving on this one specifically? I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that the massive uptick of fascist organizing in California. They're even trying to push a ballot initiative that's a very unlikely ballot initiative, by the way, to ban gender affirming care for minors in the state, which like for the record is terrifying, but still like very unlikely. The point is, like, even in like the deepest of blue areas, you have to take like fascist organizing seriously, and you can't fully trust your government. Again, like Michigan is not really doing nearly as much as they should in order to protect trans rights. They've only just upgraded Elliot Larson.
Yeah,
However, it is still possible for this bill in California to pass. I do believe that California already has a supermajority of Democrats. So in the House and Senate, I'm not 100% sure, but if they can get that 2/3 together, which I assume is the threshold, like it is for most places, they could easily force this law to take effect anyways, which would be a real a deserved embarrassment for the California's governor.
yeah, exactly. And just as a quick aside, it's got this got me thinking. So, transphobic activity in progressive areas. So I was just in Canada last week. It's an interesting time to be in Canada because the whole the thing about the assassination of the Sikh Canadian citizen just dropped. But there was also another big news story, and it had me watching the Canadian news because it was kind of fascinating because there were these transphobic protests across Canada that were outnumbered by counter protesters. But what was interesting to me was the a lot of what they report on Canada. It was a lot of the same kind of false neutrality that I see in the American media. And while I was had the TV tune in, they were interviewing this little grandma who's like, "Well, I'm not against trans people. I just don't like what they're teaching in schools." And you read behind the between the lines of that, it's like trans people can exist. I just want to pretend that they don't. And it really what really struck me was that is really the power of this right-wing propaganda is making people think things are happening that aren't. And it's like all these Canadian grandmas who think that who knows what they think is being taught in schools, but they are being fed this constant diet of misinformation. So, you know, again, another appeal to our listeners. It can feel really helpless. Sometimes people can feel helpless. Look at this constant stream of anti-trans bigotry coming up in the news pipeline, but you can even have a profound effect talking to your grandma or your auntie or whomever who's maybe a little ignorant about these issues, and especially trying to catch them before they get too deep in the fascist misinformation pipeline. But you did see that prop up where Canada, an ostensibly and literally more progressive country than America, again, doesn't have its shortage of capitalist problems. Um, is feeling the impact of this wave of anti-trans propaganda, and it's something that we need to look out for, especially here in Michigan, which is seeing under this slightly more progressive trajectory. There's a ton of reactionary elements in our state that are trying to seed the ground with more hateful misinformation, and Yeah, talk to your grandma before she goes to before she's misinformed and goes to a protest.
Yeah, one thing that I will consistently say to cis allies is that I don't want you to be overly supportive to me. I want you to be overly supportive to the cis people in your life. Like that's that. Like if someone's my friend, I already know that they're for me, right? Like obviously it'd be a deal breaker otherwise. But like you really do need to start having those conversations. And while the overall numbers of the anti-trans Canada march, like the pro-trans protesters like overwhelmed them most of the like for the most part, especially in the larger cities in the South where the overwhelming majority of Canadians live in the first place. Out in the country and in like the plain states, you hear that like that wasn't the case. Like in fact, like you'd hear a lot of the anti-trans protesters would outnumber them in those like kind of small situations, which again, like much smaller subset of the population. But I know that it's likely that they'll have another election, and the conservatives are looking better in the polls there for some reason. So it's not to say that Canada isn't also under risk. Um, a lot of this stuff is like just getting exported internationally, like this sort of awful ideology. You see it in like far right parties in Europe. There's a detransitioner documentary that's going to be airing on Australian channels, for example. Which, by the way, all those documentaries tend to have the same five people, despite like them claiming it's a widespread issue that happens all the time, which is
Like
a whole other
you
discussion.
cherry pick the contrarian analysts and then just highlight them over and over again, even when they get
Exactly.
debunked. But yeah, that's they have a title next to their name, so they're easy to kind of fool people into thinking they know what they're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And like the whole the American College of Pediatrics thing, like those sort of fake organizations designed to like push misinformation. And it's just like you really got to be wary of this. Again, like start talking to your people, talk to your relatives especially. And yeah. Um,
Okay, sorry about that. Quick break, everybody. We're back. We've got some. Gonna finish talking about. I know you had some more points to talk about Canada. We've got a little bit of historical stuff to talk about too in here in just a sec. So Nora, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so for Canada, there's a lot of places that are at risk of like if things could be a lot worse. It's not nearly as bad as it is in the US yet. However, there are two provinces out of the 13 that do have some anti-trans laws that are already in the books. Um, and like I guess most of the provinces are at least like high risk within 2 years or moderate risk within 2 years, which is really concerning. But for more details on that, you can look up Celeste Trianon. I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. I She's like positioning herself as the Aaron Reed of the U.S. in terms of like like I'm sorry, like the equivalent of Aaron Reed in the U.S. and the fact that she's the one who's going to be focusing on like trans issues in the country, like in different provinces on the government level, as well as various actions to push against. She does also have an anti-trans legislative and risk assessment map, but I think the main takeaways are that things like there are some policies that already exist that mostly apply to schools in both Saska, Saskatchewan and New Brunswick. I believe I'm getting that right. And they are at risk of getting like worse in Ontario and Manitoba. So like keep track of like imminent risk of getting worse. So keep track of your people there. If you know anyone in that area, like make sure they know how to stand up for themselves. However, Newfoundland, Yukon, and British Columbia all have like currently no appetite for any anti-trans legislation. So those appear to be the safest states so far. In fact, Yukon has like a lot, despite being like way up north, right next to Alaska, like has very well funded trans healthcare. Like you'll have trans people that live there for a couple of years just to take advantage of that. But it's definitely something to like worth keep track of, especially with the elections coming up. I do have a friend from Canada who is non-binary, who's been on the show a couple of years back. I'm trying to get them back on, but they've been busy lately. But you'll know if we're able to get the interview with them.
Yeah, well, looking
Um,
forward to that if we can set it up. That's for sure.
Yeah, so going back to the US, there's like a lot of like and like the scrutiny of the so-called anti-trans experts is that like for example, one of them in court couldn't name a single like puberty blocker medication that they were trying to get rid of, which really draws into question their um their role as experts in the first place. I'm trying to remember like which specific court this was in, but it was pretty crazy to see. Oh, it was it was probably Florida, but like that's not important. Like again, like these so-called experts are running off of like fake information, anecdotal evidence, and not even knowing what they're trying to ban, which I think is really significant. Um, they're definitely not good at doing a good a job of knowing their enemy as we are. So and like and of course, like with this whole like propaganda of like, oh, it's gonna be like affecting the kids. We got to protect the kids. Well, it was never really about the kids, and I think the fact that a Florida judge allows the trans adult care ban to continue to take effect is a significant proof of that. Currently, it is the only state in the U.S. with an adult care ban. I know Missouri briefly did it, but like the attorney general walked that back. But the fact that an attorney general on their own can just as easily, interpret the law that way in order to take healthcare away from people like across the whole state is really upsetting. And so is the fact that like Florida itself already has the second highest population of trans people in the country currently. Um, it is worth mentioning that not all trans healthcare is banned for adults. And it might not even be, I'm not even sure if it is banned for minors anymore. They might have blocked that separately somehow. But like, it's just really devastating news to hear, and I really think people should like at least try to move out, not just like and like I'm not even because of the whole like oh if you don't like red states leave thing. I know that that's really problematic as well, but like Florida's going to be underwater in a couple of years, so like people should try to leave there anyways. If I'm being honest. Um, but yeah, bringing up Missouri, it is really worth mentioning how they were able to get Washington University transgender clinic to close by using a lot of the same anti-abortion tactics. Not to mention that like the ruling in Florida, as well as a Texas drag ban to partially go through, both use similar language to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, showing that these these issues are directly connected and they're being pushed by the same people with similar strategies. And it's really gonna be scary to see how that moves forward because they're only just now starting to see political consequences for it. Um, finally, but like there is like at least we do have history on our side, knowing that anti-trans people are fascists. In fact, recent research and German court proves that Nazis targeted trans people specifically, who were often misinterpreted as being gay men or lesbians. Originally, that was persecuted by the Nazis. It is worth mentioning that in the Weimar Republic before the rise of Hitler was one of the more trans-friendly countries in Europe at the time. And they used the term transvestites, which is kind of outdated. But like the point is, they were giving transvestite certificates that allowed them to be exempt from laws against cross-dressing, allowed them to change their names legally. They could get care from Mangus Hirschfield's Institute from Sexual Science until, of course, that was the institute was burned. It was really a Library of Alexandria burning of like queer history and science before
We've
then. And when you
we've
hear about
referred just quick interjection. We've referred to that historical event on the show before, and I think I often say it's like if you think trans people just started existing yesterday, there is a reason that you think that,
mm-hmm,
and it goes back to the Institute of Sexology. But keep going. I'm sorry.
right, exactly. And like when you see people like images of the Nazis burning books back at like in various historical documents, those are the books in question. Like chances are that's the case, and it's pretty on the nose to see like I don't know some like Republican candidate like lighting books on fire in his backyard with a flamethrower. to completely lack of subtlety or historical awareness, or perhaps perfect historical awareness to who they're trying to signal support from. And but again, to quote Rage Against the Machine, they don't got to burn the books; they just remove them.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
And I know
And
that's a lot to like fit into like I guess one whole update, but there's a lot of stuff that are constantly under attack with trans rights, and it's important to at least bring up, even though we have limited time on the show.
yeah, and I just a couple parting thoughts on that. Again, that is a historical point that we brought up on the show before, and I think what's important with this court case is there was, bad faith debaters have tried to minimize the extent to which the Nazi regime persecuted trans people. I know they famously tried to. There was one outlier instance of a trans person being able to keep their identity inside a concentration camp, which is not,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's a very pleasant place to be trans. But
And
yeah,
even that
again,
person was like a huge outlier compared to like a lot of the others. Like that's the
mm,
only example they could find of historically. There's still
yeah.
research being done on it, of course, but like that's going to be ongoing.
And something I also see conservatives too, they try to say that like, oh, the Germans or the not the Germans, the Nazis, they were burning books of pornography or something, which they still pivot as like an assault on free speech, but it's deliberate erasure of what they were really targeting and trying to do,
Mm-hmm.
and to really bring the point home of how history can rhyme at times. There's this part kind of sent some chills because it is almost like word for word what trans people in the United States are dealing with right now. So there was a trans person is referred to their name uh, was it Simon, I think, and um,
Last name Simon, yes.
last name was Simon, yes, and uh, their arrest, the justification that the Nazis gave for their arrest um, was because they went they were a known proprietor of an underground club, an LGBTQ club in Nazi Germany, and she got hauled into court for criticizing the Nazi regime, and they claimed, and this is in the actual criminal reports that you can find in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They referred to Simon as a danger to the youth, and that sending her to a concentration camp was absolutely necessary. So again, whenever you hear conservatives and reactionaries and Republicans refer to trans people as a danger to the youth in today's parlance, I want you to remember that. Remember that ink that is in the Holocaust Museum on a Nazi police report. And remember
Mm-hmm.
that this is an old strategy, an old tactic. And when modern American conservatives are putting forth that point, it is in some cases word for word exactly what the Nazis were doing to trans people in the 30s and 40s.
Exactly. And I think the whole well, not even leaks, like they opened, like they'll admit it publicly, the whole Project 2025 thing about, like, so by the way, Project 2025 for a quick, like, context is like a quote mandate from leadership by a big conservative think tank on what like the next Republican president should do. And they put a huge emphasis on like banning pornography, like just in general across the internet, wherever, and like also considering queer people existing to be pornographic and a danger to children, and that people who do that should be locked up in I don't remember what the term they use specifically, but yeah, it was basically a concentration camp. Like they're being out in the open about it. Like they have the free PDF on their website even. And we can talk about that more in depth on a later episode, but there is a lot of really terrifying stuff in there that really warrants going over.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we'll link to that article in our show notes. Really encourage folks to read it. Um, and especially it gives a lot of really important, specific historical context and sources for this important point about the persecution of trans people in Nazi Germany. Um, so I've got one story, last story I want to talk about, and we've been talking about a lot about right wing propaganda, and there is the grandfather of right-wing propaganda here in the United States has just stepped down as the CEO of News Corp. I'm referring to Rupert Murdoch. And I thought we could spend this last 10 minutes talking a little bit about his particularly toxic legacy. And he's probably one of the main reasons we have this show. Which is to say, again, we critique kind of the centrist capitalist media, but the empire of Fox News is the single most toxic aspect of that media behemoth that has really brainwashed generations of conservative leaning people in the United States to increasingly and over the years believe increasingly bigoted, increasingly misinformed, on increasingly dangerous views about the people who live and work around them. And just some of the nuts and bolts of this story, this is not good news in a sense. The person who's going to be stepping up to replace Murdoch, in many ways, is actually worse. He's going to be putting his son, Lachlan Murdoch, in charge, who is much more prone to embracing right-wing conspiracy theories, much more prone to embracing the more violent reactionary side of the Republican Party. Whereas, not to give, I mean, this is no compliment to Murdoch, but he at least gets a little irritated when they deviate too far into conspiracy land. Lachlan does not seem to have those similar kinds of restraints.
And
Um,
like Lachlan considers himself to be a far right nihilist, which is also very concerning.
yeah, exactly. And what's interesting too is we are looking at a potential battle for control of Fox News later on because
It's
Rupert,
literally the plot of Succession.
yes, it is, and Rupert Murdoch's other son is more of like a classical neoconservative. Um, actually believes climate change is real. Of course, thinks free market economics can magically fix it, but as easily saying that. So it is. There's a potential struggle for the future of Fox News somewhere down the line. There's some talk about maybe James Murdoch and his sisters could wrestle control from Lachlan, but I mean that's all kind of palace intrigue. The damage of Fox News has basically been done, and
Yes.
whatever form Fox News takes in the future, they have already changed the status quo irrevocably to a place where outlets like OAN, outlets like Infowars, um,
Like
outlets
Andrew
like the
Tate,
Andrew
like
Tate, Ben
Postil
Shapiro,
on Twitter.
yeah, who maybe back in the day would have had to settle for a kooky right-wing community access show, now have these tremendous national platforms where they are seeding their dangerous and often stupid ideas to millions and millions of people. And it was Rupert Murdoch's News Corp and Fox News that effectively normalized that over the last 25 years or so.
Yeah, and one thing that's significant, like say if Lachlan does become the heir to this massive media empire, is that like at minimum he's going to have a lot more latitude to be sort of the ultimate final decision maker. And someone like that making like the final decisions on things like Fox News's framing and stuff of that nature is really concerning. We can only hope that like someone slightly less bad, like in terms of like the his kids would make it there, but like whoever wins, we lose in this regard. Like there's no real good outcome out of this as long as Fox News continues to exist. But hey, maybe if we get really lucky, they'll get hit with a couple more defamation lawsuits that'll force the company into bankruptcy.
Yeah, because you know what we are looking at, unless Fox News goes bankrupt, the most likely trajectory, because again, it all comes down to making money, and even in the depositions against, when they've been sued by Dominion, they've come out and said we were losing viewership, so we had to pivot to these conspiracy theories about the election in order to get more eyeballs. Um, and I very much think like once Rupert Murdoch gives the reins over to Lachlan, those guardrails are going to be off. Um, and whereas Rupert Murdoch may have a distaste for following these conspiracy theories around Lachlan, the intersection of his own beliefs and the pursuit of profit means they're going to chase OAN and all of these other further right outlets further to the right in order to try to keep those viewers, which even though Fox News has lost a lot of viewership over the last couple of years, especially since they fired Tucker, um, they are still one of the biggest outlets for right-wing misinformation in the country. You go to any kind of quote unquote red area, you'll find it playing in doctors' offices, in various bars, etc. So their capacity to continue to do damage to the American body politic is still very, very strong. And they are going to be capable of continue doing damage, especially as they chase profits further and further to the violent and conspiratorial right.
Yeah, the well said.
All right. I don't think I had too much. I'll say I'll link. There's a really good Democracy Now! Interview with the head of Media Matters that dives into these issues in more detail. We'll link to that in the show notes. Nora, any other parting thoughts before we wrap up today's program?
That's all I have to say.
Okay, and if you're listening on the radio, stay tuned. I'll be closing out the show with a UAW update. And this actually works out well because we're recording this on Sunday. I will be broadcasting this on Tuesday. So if anything happens in the intervening couple days, I will be able to give you the most updated information about what's going on with our comrades out on the east side of the state and around the country who are fighting for better working conditions and into the two-tier system, et cetera, et cetera. With that, everybody, I want to thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for our UAW update and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.